The Central Bank of Nigeria has announced the retention of the monetary policy rate at 27.5% following the conclusion of its 301st Monetary Policy Committee meeting held in Abuja. The CBN Governor Olayemi Cardoso, who briefed journalists after the meeting, says the committee decision to hold the rate steady was based on the need to sustain the disinflationary trends in the economy. Welcome to Business Point. It's a program that extracts the Nigerian economy and the government policies. I am Kike Lomo Okere. The decision of the Apex Bank to retain the monetary policy rate at 27.5% was premised on the need to sustain disinflation and sufficiently contain the price pressure. The Apex Bank Governor Olayemi Cardoso highlighted the committee's caution optimized over recent economic indicators. All 12 members of the MPC voted unanimously to maintain the MPR at 27.5%, signaling a unified stance among policymakers amid lingering inflationary pressure and exchange rate volatility. The MPR, which serves as the benchmark interest rate and has remained a key tool in the Apex Bank's effort to rein in inflation, which, while slowing in the recent months, remains the CBN's comfort zone. Also, the Apex Bank maintained a symmetric corridor around the MPR at plus 500 minus 100 basis points, retained cash ratio for deposit money banks at 50% and merchant bank at 16%, keep liquidity ratio unchanged at 30%. The CBN governor stated that maintaining the current policy stance will continue to address existing emerging inflationary pressure. Let's take a look at what the CBN governor have to say about the MPR meeting.
The MPC also noted the sustained stability in the foreign exchange market, accentuated by improved capital flows, earnings from increased crude oil production, rising non-oil exports, and significant reduction in aggregate imports. Real GDP in the first quarter of 2025 grew by 3.13% compared with 2.27% and 3.38% in the corresponding and preceding quarters of 2024 respectively. In addition, recent data on the Purchasing Managers Index indicates that the Nigerian economy remains on an expansionary path. The external sector also remains stable and resilient despite persisting uncertainties in the global macroeconomic environment. Gross external reserves rose to 40.11 billion on July 18, 2025, representing about 9.5 months of import cover for goods. Global developments. Available projections suggest that global output recovery continues at a gradual pace. However, recent developments, especially the persistent tariff war and the geopolitical tensions, may continue to disrupt supply chains and exert upward pressure on the price of imports. Disinflation in the advanced economies has slowed, prompting major central banks to be cautious of upside risks to inflation. In the emerging markets, central banks continue to calibrate monetary policy to their domestic conditions, noting the persistent risks to inflationary pressures. Outlook. Staff projections indicate a further decline in inflation in the coming months, underpinned by the current tight monetary policy stance, stable exchange rate, declining PMS prices, and moderation in food prices as the harvest season approaches. Given the persistent uncertainty in the policy environment and underlying price pressures, monetary policy will need to maintain its current stance until risks to inflation recede sufficiently.
The federal government has reiterated its commitment to expanding Nigerian refining capability, dismantling outdated regulations, and encouraging a more efficient trading environment. The Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Oil, Senator Enikin Lokpobiri, made this known at the Global Commodity Insight Conference on West Africa in Abuja. Let's take a look at the report. Nigeria is intensifying its efforts to become the central hub of refining and petroleum trade in West Africa. This ambition took center stage as industry leaders and policymakers gather at the Global Commodity Insights Conference to deliberate on regional energy strategies, private investment, and regulatory advancement. Delivering the keynote address, the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Senator Enikin Lokpobiri, outlined Nigerian target to supply more than half of West African energy demand and emerge as a key marketplace for refined petroleum products. Lokpobiri urged stakeholders not to be deterred by the global shift towards cleaner energy, emphasizing that fossil fuel remain vital to meeting Africa's short to medium-term energy needs. He noted that the government's retreat from the direct market participation has opened up space for private enterprises to thrive.
As government, our own ambition is to grow this sector. Our own ambition is to support the private sector to grow this sector. Our own ambition is to partner with our neighbors from all over West Africa to make Nigeria the hub for energy trade for the benefit of the people who live.
In his address, the Chief Executive Officer of the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, Bashir Ojulari, and President Dangote Group, Aliko Dangote, underscores the urgency of building a self-reliant refining sector in Africa. They cited the contradiction of Africa being a major crude oil exporter while remaining dependent on imported refined products, a dynamic that threatens energy security and leads to financial losses. They therefore called for unified energy policies across African nations, greater investment, and increased local ownership to retain value within the region and promote shared prosperity.
Speaks to defining imperatives for our continent's future: energy self-determination, industrial integration, and shared prosperity. We convene today at an inflection point in global energy history where the imperatives of the energy transition, supply security, and Africa demographic and economic momentum converges. This convergence is not without complexity, but it is also rich with opportunities if we choose foresight over inertia and collaboration over isolation. According to the International Energy Agency, global energy demand will rise to over 25% by 2040, with Africa contributing significantly to both demand and population growth. Meanwhile, over 80% of current global energy use remain fossil-based. There are not conflicting facts. They are coexisting truths, and they demand that Africa pause its own just transition, one that is pragmatic, phased, and anchored on our unique realities. The refining paradox of our strategic opportunity. Today, Africa exports the bulk of its crude oil, but imports refined products at a significant premium. This structural asymmetry depletes value, suppresses industrialization, heightens supply vulnerabilities, and compromises energy sovereignty.
Today, Nigeria has actually become a net exporter of refined products. Actually, before I came on the podium, I asked my people how many tons we actually exported of PMS. In the last, from June beginning to date, we have exported about 1 million tons of PMS. This last, 50 days. We have now polypropylene. By the time at our full production, Nigeria can only consume 30% of our own consumption. And we did the same with urea. And urea, we're actually, producing now 3 million tons. Indorama producing 3 million tons. So really, for you to know, Nigeria is actually catching up, is going to beat Egypt in the next 16 months. And will be the biggest exporter of urea in Africa. This is a historic turnaround. And with our LPG production of 2,500 tons per day, we are working to encourage more homes to increase the LPG consumption or utilization. And we are just getting started. Very soon the refinery will be listed to give all Nigerians the opportunity to become shareholders. We are open to partnerships with African governments, private investors, and regional institutions. Our vision is simple but ambitious. Africa should refine all the petroleum products it consumes right here on the soil of Africa. Closing. Before I conclude, let me take this opportunity to address concerns around monopoly and dominance. The reality is that for too many people who have both the means and the opportunity to contribute meaningfully to our nation's growth, choose instead to criticize from the sidelines while investing their wealth abroad, adding little to Nigeria's real economy or Africa's economy. We have chosen to bet on Nigeria and we will continue to do so. So we should not allow dumping to destroy our manufacturing base like what it did in so many other industries like textiles and coal. Others should be encouraged to build refineries if they are serious. I think encouraging other people to build refineries is the job of the NNDPRA and also the government. So, Engineer Farouk, I rely on your leadership to make sure we encourage those people who have collected licenses that are not using. And I believe anybody who collected these licenses from you, either you cancel them or you put a penalty on yearly basis.
In his welcome remark, Chief Executive Officer of the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority advocates for a regional pricing index that reflects West African unique economic and logistical landscape. Ahmed reveals that Only 34% of refined fuel consumed in West Africa is produced locally, even though the region trades around 2 million metric tons of gasoline monthly. He highlighted Nigeria's strategic advantage with its deep sea port and update regulatory system, which position it to lead in regional petroleum trade. He also pointed to the collaboration with S&P Global Commodity Insights as a catalyst for transparent pricing, reliable data, and enhanced market efficiency.
Regional pricing reference point will facilitate growth of trading petroleum products in the region, establishment of additional storage and supply infrastructure to accommodate the growing volume of trading activities in the region, real-time pricing data that is reflective of the peculiarities of the West African market fundamentals, attracting downstream investment through various trade zones and digital market platforms, supply chain visibility and energy security across the African region and beyond. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, under the visionary leadership of His Excellency President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, GCER, key policies and market development reforms have been introduced and implemented in Nigeria, which is enabling the growth of petroleum industry and attractive investment opportunities in the sector. These reforms include the implementation of the Petroleum Industry Act 2021, full liberalization of downstream sector, improving macroeconomic environment, and ease of doing business. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the regional supply of fuels in Africa has grown through improved refining capabilities in Nigeria, Ghana, Niger, Senegal, and Cote d'Ivoire, which currently stands at about 1.335 million barrels per day. Our statistical data for supply into West Africa region reveals that about 2 million metric tons per month of gasoline is being traded, consisting of about 1.44 million metric tons, which is 69% of imported products into the region, in addition to about 0.61 million tons, or 31% refining contribution from our own region, which means that the trade within the West African coast, whether from Lomé or Senegal, all the way to Guinea and the Gulf of Guinea, has been very active. Our contribution from our refining capacity is only about 31% and growing. Furthermore, the 2025 OPEC World Oil Outlook projects a 1.2 million barrels per day additional refining capacity in Africa between 2025 and 2030. The West African region will make significant contribution to this projection through new projects, upgrades, and rehabilitations, which are currently at various stages of completion in different countries of the West Africa, in Africa. This increased refining capacity will improve the market liquidity of refined petroleum products in the region. Nigeria is rapidly evolving into a midstream and downstream trading zone. Nigeria has an active maritime coastline that links all West African markets, deep sea ports with modern technologies and infrastructure, as well as regulatory framework that supports world-class standards of maritime operations. These factors have positioned the country as a viable hub in West African energy sector.
I think it's important to add the year to this, because I think this is the beginning of a number of gatherings that we'll have in the coming years as we're looking to develop assessments and pricing benchmarks for this exciting and fast-growing region. My name is Vera Bly, and I'm head of the Platts benchmark business at S&P Global. So this conference today provides the perfect foundational platform for exploring the potential to develop a West African reference market for refined products. So we'll be focusing on regional standardization, pricing mechanisms, data transparency, stakeholder collaboration, market fundamentals, etc. And at Platts we are in the data business. So I've actually...
Other speakers at the conference echoed the call for stronger cooperation among government, regulators, and private stakeholders to build a robust, inclusive, and sustainable refining ecosystem across Africa. The Nigerian public debt to GDP ratio dropped to 39.4% in the first quarter of 2025, following the successful rebasing of the country's gross domestic product by the National Bureau of Statistics. The rebasing exercise, which expanded GDP coverage to include sectors such as the digital economy, fintech, creativity industry, and the informal sector, significantly increased Nigeria's nominal economic output and improved its debt sustainability profile on paper. As of March 31st, 2025, Nigerian total public debt stood at 149.39 trillion naira, comprising of 78.76 trillion naira in the domestic debt and 70.63 trillion naira in the external debt, according to the data from the Debt Management Office. With the rebased GDP now valued at 379.17 trillion naira, which covers the 12-month period of the second quarter of 2024 to the first quarter of 2025, the total debt stock represents 39.4% of the GDP. This is slightly below the self-imposed limit of 40% debt to GDP set by the government and the 55% threshold set by the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. With the rebased GDP now valued at 379.17 trillion naira, which covers the 12-month period of second quarter of 2024 and the first quarter of 2025, the total debt stock represents 39.4% of the GDP. This is slightly below self-imposed limit of 40% debt to GDP set by the government and the 55 threshold set by the World Bank. The breakdown shows that the domestic debt accounts for 20.77% of the GDP, while the external contributes 18.63%. It is observed that while the country overall debt to GDP ratio at 39.4%, it is a notable improvement from pre-rebasing level. It is slightly higher than the 38.8% recorded in the fourth quarter of 2024. Rebasing cuts 2024 debt ratio below self-imposed debt to GDP limit. A similar trend was observed in the data from the fourth quarter of 2024, where the debt to GDP ratio also declined sharply following the rebasing. Nigerian public debt as of December 31st, 2024. Alright, this is where we draw the curtain on Business Point today. Join me again tomorrow on Global Television, channel 365 and start time 276. To stay connected, kindly follow us on all our social media platforms at Global TV NG. Till I come your way again, I am Kike Lomo Okeri. I celebrate you all.